So I'm Shelby Molina. I'm a district veterinarian with the Wisconsin Department of Agriculture, Trade, and Consumer Protection. And we're here because your flock is enrolling in the Scrapie program, and I'm here to do the initial inspection. So we need to check and make sure that your inventory matches your tattoos or tags or whatever you're using for official identification. And then we'll also talk about the Scrapie program too, so you know what you're getting into.
How big of a problem is Scrapie in the United States right now? Is it something that's been pretty much eradicated, or is it still a pretty big threat?
So the numbers have gone down quite a bit. So it's less than 1% of that they find per year that are infected with Scrapie. So of the ones that they check. So they're doing routine slaughter surveillance on cull ewes and cull goats looking for Scrapie. They also get reports from veterinarians and owners who think they might have signs of Scrapie, and they test those. But of the ones that they test, it's less than 1% at this point. So it's gone down quite a bit. And in goats, it's very rare. If you look at the USDA website on their Scrapie page, you can look at the map, and they'll actually show you where they've had, which states have had positives. Most of the goats that have come down with Scrapie, it's because they've been associated with sheep that have Scrapie.
Okay. So what are some signs of Scrapie if your animal was to be Scrapie positive?
So mental changes. So what it does is it affects the brain. So you might see mental changes first, attitude changes, personality changes, that kind of thing. You might also have, the reason it's called Scrapie is because they'll also itch. So they'll be rubbing.
Okay.
So in sheep, it'll be more noticeable because they'll have wool loss, and it's usually symmetrical on their flanks, on their head, something like that. And then they'll start sometimes gait changes, so like bunny hopping in the rear or high stepping in the front, some problem with the gait, or maybe what I've seen too is they'll be running and then they'll turn and fall down instead of be able to turn the corner. They might isolate themselves from the rest of the flock. Eventually they get to the point where they might be stargazing. Eventually they go down,
Okay.
and die. You might have also just weight loss because they're not eating like they should.
How is Scrapie spread?
So it's usually spread from an animal that has Scrapie, usually at lambing or kidding time. It's in the fluids, in the placenta, in all of that matter, and that's the most important time. And it infects the kids that are in that contaminated environment at the time that it infected doe, kids, or ewe lambs.
So what are some key components to being enrolled in the program? I know for me, the first step was to fill out an application, and then I became in contact with you.
Yep.
And then now what are we going to be doing today?
So today, you've already submitted your inventory, listing all of your animals with their official identification, their age, sex, breed, all of that. And so the key components are you have to keep an inventory of all your animals and account for every one of them. So ones that you bring in, where they come from, ones that go out, where they go to, when they leave, all of that. Another key component is to test anything that dies for Scrapie if it's old enough. So 14 months of age or older, it's eligible to be tested and needs to have the brain sampled for Scrapie if it dies. And then also to be looking for signs of Scrapie in your flock and reporting if you have a problem. Say, this might be Scrapie, I'm going to be watching this animal. And if it does die or you decide to euthanize it, then have it tested.
So for 5 years, I'm going to be having an annual inspection.
Yeah, and it's ongoing.
Okay.
So even after that, it would be, if you stay in the program, it's every year.
But after that 5-year mark is when I would be a certified flock, or no?
Yes. So,
Okay.
Yeah.
And then once I become a Scrapie Free certified flock, what does that do for my herd?
So it might open up marketing opportunities for you, for flocks or herds that are looking for Scrapie certified animals. In goats, they're really not as much as in sheep, as much demand for that because it's much more of a problem in sheep. But one of the main issues is if you're going to export, countries that do not have Scrapie or that have very little Scrapie want people to bring in animals from Scrapie-free areas or Scrapie-free flocks. And so if you have some sort of certification, you're much more likely to be able to export.
Okay. And then what's the difference between the 5 and the 7 year marks of the program?
So 7 years, you become able to be export certified. So most of the countries won't accept your animals for import until you've been in the certification program for 7 years.
Okay.
Initially, when the Scrapie program first started, it was a 5-year mark. But because Scrapie is such a long-term chronic disease, they want to make sure your flock or herd has been monitored for long enough that if there's been Scrapie in there, you're going to find it. So that's why many of them extended it to 7 years for export.
And then can you talk a little bit about the different ways that you test each year? I know culling, you said every animal that dies after a certain age needs to have a head scented?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
And then there is a biopsy option as well.
Right. So in order to be on the Scrapie program and maintain your status, you have to test a certain number for each year of status to show that you actually are monitoring for Scrapie. Well, if you don't have any animals that die, or if you're a small flock and you don't have enough, you also have the option to do live animal testing, which is a tissue biopsy. And usually what's done is a rectal biopsy because they have lymphoid tissue all around the inside of the rectum there. You can take a little snip of that, test that lymphoid tissue that's in there, and check it for Scrapie.
And that is very exciting to me because thankfully we don't have a lot of losses in our herd, and I would hate the idea of having to keep animals around just for the sole purpose of culling. Mm-hmm. So once I started looking into the program, I was really happy to hear that because I don't want to have to cull animals. So we are going to start with a whole herd biopsy after everybody finishes kidding. So that's the route I'm going to go. There are different options when you get started with this program. Some involve culling on an annual basis or submitting the head samples. And then each year, is it a minimum of 1 sample?
1 per year per status. So in order to advance in status, you have to have enough samples. So for instance, I have a small sheep flock down in Beloit. She doesn't have that many that she culls. So she's maintained the same years in status for quite a few years, and then she, will advance when she gets her next cull.
Sure.
Well, now she's year 4. She's got enough samples. So that's kind of how that goes.
Okay. So for us, I was explaining to the doctor that we keep a couple kids each year, and then we kind of keep our herd the same size, but we send off a couple of the older does. So the way it's going to work in my herd most likely is each year the new yearlings are going to get tested. So that's how we plan on advancing forward in this program.
Yeah, so you'll have had the entire foundation flock tested, and then the new ones that'll be staying, they'll be tested.
So it's 15 or more samples over 5 years, correct?
Yep, in order to be at 5 years of status. Yep.
And a minimum of 1 per year.
Yep.
Got it. All right. So today the main thing we're going to do is we're going to verify my flock inventory. So the vet is going to take a look at my tattoos and cross-reference them with our registration papers. And so then my inventory will be official. So we have 8 does, and the does are the only ones that are going to be getting checked today. I do keep a buck, but he's not on the property, and we can get into that in a different video. But the bucks and the bringing in and out of animals into your herd is definitely a consideration for this program because you're not allowed to commingle new does with your herd unless they are at or above the same level in the program. The bucks are a little different story with some criteria. You are allowed to attend things like shows and linear appraisal, but you need to use biosecurity precautions, which a lot of people already are doing. You don't want to have your animals be touching nose to nose. Dr. Molina is going to be taking a picture of all of our registration papers to keep on file, and then she's going to be checking the tattoos on all the goats' ears.